MOON. That spells we kind of maybe hate Nadine, y'all. Oh my gosh. I mean, yes. Hey, everyone. I'm Chauncey K Robinson, aka Twisted Woman CKR, and with me is my co-host
Michael Damian, MOON. That reference was already used. Yeah.
Yes. And thank you for joining us today. This is for episode 4 of The Stand, The House of the Dead, The Stand 2020/2021 miniseries on CBS All Access. Thank you to all of you joining us in the chat live and all of you who are watching on the replay. We are so happy to be doing these weekly sessions. This has been a somewhat polarizing series thus far. Some people love it. Some people are hating it. Some people are kind of in wait and see mode. And we are trudging through as we are trying to, kind of decipher this adaptation of one of Stephen King's, most prolific novels. And so what we want to do is go over how we felt about the episode, what happened in the episode, and our thoughts about those particular moments, and then comparison between the 90s versions and then also the novel itself, for those who are familiar with it or want to know just what they may be missing out if they never read the novel. So thank you to Cage Akuma, who is in the chat. We look forward to these weekly sessions as well. And we love that, people are engaged in, what is going on with the series. Okay. So overall thoughts about this particular episode.
I loved it. I kind of wish the whole show began like this, but I understand why they had to do it. I thought it was great. Once again, a lot of my favorite characters are still my favorite characters that we talked about from last week's show, but I have a new favorite character as well. And I thought they did the original book and the miniseries justice.
Okay. I think my thoughts about this particular episode, I'm still going to stick with the fact that episode 3 is still probably one of my faves. Although I think this episode 4 is still on par with this episode. Like, it didn't go back to episode 1 and 2, which I was not necessarily feeling in how they were portraying the story. I thought we had some moments of heart in this episode. More of my fave characters became clearer, and some of the characters I can't stand became even clearer in this one. So I felt like we were making more of a connection with the characters, because I know that was definitely an issue for some people when it came to, just for those who have watched the replay and commented, thank you, saying that it was hard for them to connect with some of the characters with how things were being portrayed. And I think we're getting to the point, especially in episode 3 and 4, where it was a bit better in connecting with some of the characters. I actually felt like, okay, I want to know that this character is going to be okay, as opposed to episode 1 and 2, where I was kind of like, I can take or leave all of these people, which was not the case for me in the 90s version. I cared about people in the 90s version. So it's nice that it's kind of getting to that point, right?
Oh, yeah. Like, I love that. I love the fact how, like, angsty and grungy Franny is currently with, she was like the melodramatic woe is me damsel in distress from the original miniseries. I like how conflicted she is with all of the events that happen, and I also find that's weird that Larry Underwood kind of took a step back. Like, they put him in the backseat in this past episode, but they also brought back Stu, and like, I can watch anything he's in.
James Marsden,
James Marsden, and Stephen King was in this one.
Yeah, we'll get to that with one of the infamous, Stephen King's kind of like the Stan Lee of his own stuff as well, where he kind of has he tends to have cameos in his stuff. And we had a cameo. And if you caught the cameo, let us know before we get to it in the chat and whatnot. Let's see if you caught it as well when you watched this episode or not. And okay, so this episode, we had 2 flashbacks, or maybe more so one major flashback in 3 segments. And then we had seen situations with Nadine, situations with more so the politics of what's going on in present day Boulder. I guess you can consider what's happening in Boulder right now the present. I guess that's where we kind of established it in episode 3, that the present is considered Boulder. Anything before that is before. And it's not what's happening in Boulder is what's happening at this moment. And also we found out that we're at the part where they're sending spies to Vegas. So we'll probably see more of Randall Flagg and Vegas maybe in the upcoming episodes. So kind of with the major thing, I guess, my thing first is let's talk about the flashbacks of Nadine, well, not Nadine, of Franny, Stu, Glenn, and Harold. And we had an additional new character, Dana.
Yeah, Dana.
Yeah, Dana. Where we saw her, and she's a very strong female character that got introduced into the series. And so I remember when we were watching it, you kind of used the word deliverance when you were thinking about some of the stuff that was happening.
Oh, yeah, Deliverance. If you don't know, it's a fun film about canoeing in Georgia. Or not, lack for a better word. But I was like, oh, wow, they are definitely doing things that you could not do in, I think, 1995 on television.
Yeah.
And because of that, they're offering Harold to become more of a gray character. Like, he has the potential to do good, but he's also, and I think they're kind of filling it in, he's definitely today's incel. Like,
Harold
is definitely an incel of today, where he's just like a guy who isn't analyzing why things are going the way they are and demanding everything be handed to him. And you can definitely see that. And just as a guy, and I believe Damon brought this up in an earlier episode, sorry for calling you out, but yeah, like at our worst, like I think men in general are Harold. But we don't ever
I hope not.
We don't ever want to be Harold.
Okay.
But we all know a guy, and he's like, wow, that is the lowest form of manhood right there.
Yeah. Well,
so we all know him.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw some layers of Harold to a certain degree, a little bit akin to maybe the 90s one early on, where he was he could have gone either way depending on how things happened. And I think with this one, I kind of felt bad for him with that face off with the guy. And we'll get into that because this part is actually in the book in a way.
Yeah.
But just to talk about specifically what we saw, I kind of felt bad for him because there was this explanation from the real big dude, Southern rapist dude, of, this is the way society really works. They made us think before that, it wasn't that guys who are beta, which is Harold, I guess, because this whole weird thing of alpha and beta males or people think that they can handle it, but let's get things back to the regular nature of stuff. And that's what we saw. And we saw a very toxic version of that, where it was like he's fighting Harold, and the two women, Dana and the woman who was with her who got shot, and Franny were about to, get sexually assaulted in front of Harold. And we kind of saw the darker side of what can happen when things descend into chaos.
They're definitely leaning into realism in this one. Not just like propped up corpses and melodrama with the same guitar riff all throughout the show. And that was, I mean, nothing wrong with that. That was one of the first songs I learned how to play on guitar. But going back to the actual content we're talking about, I was into it. Like, oh my God, the stakes are high and none of them are corny.
Yeah.
Like, wow, there is danger happening here.
Yeah, way more intense. And I like that the fact that we got to know a new character a little bit better, where we get certain, and I think, this is what we were talking about with some of the flashbacks, that what we're seeing is that they're kind of doing this thing where when we see a new character, you kind of get an explanation of where they came from, of how they got to Boulder, but not so much. I like that they're doing it a little bit better than the previous episodes, where it's not so jarring from the things that are happening in present day Boulder. So, you know, we had that situation, and then we had it. So we see how Stu and Franny got to connect. We see how, you know, in a way, you know, Franny pretty much really rejected Harold outright. I think I understood why she had to be very stern with him in a sense, because you can't, with a guy like him, maybe you couldn't be like, well, you know, it's not that, you know, try to make an excuse, because then he could try to form it in his head. But at the same time, I was like, man, she is kind of harsh right now. But not that you have to be polite when you're rejecting someone either.
Oh, exactly. And to be fair, this Harold guy, the lowest form of guys, he was peeping on her in the pilot. He was harassing her. He was stalking her. He wants to kill any man who gets in his way of the prize in his incel mind.
I don't know if he was exactly there yet in terms of trying to kill others. I think it was, because you have to remember, he's pretty young in this one too.
Right, but he did say he wanted to kill Stu. In the beginning of the show. That's who I was referring
when
to.
When he was in Boulder. I'm talking about before, when Franny rejected him before they even got to Boulder.
Okay. Yeah, you're right about that. I'll backtrack. But up until the killing the other guys part, Harold, and I want to give an applause to Franny for having to walk across apocalyptic America with him, with this incel. And I felt really, really terrible about that. But at the same time, I understand Franny's thinking about Dana, about sending her on her own, because I think if Franny didn't have to partner up with Harold the entire time, I don't think Franny would have allowed Dana to just go about her own way to Vegas to be a spy.
What do you mean?
Because there's a bunch of creepy dudes out there in the apocalypse. And Franny had to deal with one of them.
Yeah, but I also think, you know, we saw, well, we'll get to the whole politics of it, but in terms of the flashback itself, I was saying about how, you know, they met Dana, and, you know, now she's introduced, and she beat that guy to you know, to a pulp.
Kick ass, that pipe. Yeah,
and you could tell that there was a lot of aggression, because there was probably the backdrop of what she dealt with before they had even rescued her, or she was able to kind of, you know, help in rescuing herself. So I don't know if we'll get more of a flashback of how Dana got, you know, taken in by that crazy guy or anything like that. And yeah, Cage is saying in the thing that, I feel a degree of pity to Harold. I mean, I'm asexual, so I feel like he could be redeemed, but in the end, he could never express his true emotions. And he couldn't in this new world deal with the fact that Franny had moved on. But it's kind of weird, because it's like, well, Franny's not the only woman in the world either. So it was kind of like, he did have the incel kind of vibes to it.
He's about to go into a town full of nothing but blonde women, because I think that's the only hair type that survived the apocalypse at this point, except for Dana. So
we're seeing I get it, but we're seeing other characters, we're seeing Dana and things like that. And right now we're talking about the flashback of of Stu and Glenn kind of rescuing Dana and the others, and also Franny and Harold. And I think that part, maybe it really broke Harold at that moment, because he was totally humiliated in front of Franny. You know, he had been rescuing her. He had been kind of her protector. And then Stu comes in, and he's the real protector. So Harold's kind of taken from that moment, even after the Franny thing. So I think what we also saw in that flashback was Harold's, his descent into being so resentful towards Stu.
And I understand that too, because Stu's a protector. Harold sees an opportunity, because they're the two last people alive in their town. And Stu is more about everybody, and Harold is all about himself.
Yes, and that might come from age too. You know, I'm not trying, like I said,
it might be.
Yeah, I guess I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit in the fact that I don't want to just completely write Harold off as just a straight out villain, because I think we've seen characters who are more villainous than him, aka Nadine, who we'll get to in a little bit as well. There was still innocence in Harold.
But in this one, but it was waning.
Yeah, it was definitely waning. And so what we also saw this episode was the idea of the committee, so we got kind of more into the political happenings of Boulder, right? Yeah. With the 5 chosen and them we kept seeing their inside discussions, like what do they tell about the stranger who looked like he was crucified? Who's going to be the one to speak in front of everyone? Larry stepped up. He's obviously a crowd kind of guy. He was able to kind of, get everyone to calm down when Stu couldn't, and then Stu steps up, and then Harold, being Harold because of his, perhaps plan to kill them all in one spot or something, decides to nominate them all in total to stay the leaders. And everyone seems okay with this. So what did you think about the fact that we were getting a little bit more of the political happenings of their decision making? Did you think that was necessary? I thought it was okay, but I was kind of like, I feel like those parts in the episode kind of lagged for me. Every time we were in a scene where we had to sit and watch how they decided stuff.
Well, are we at the comparison part yet? Or just based on this? Okay, cool.
Based on everything.
Cool. I don't want to derail everything.
Yeah.
What'd I do? I liked it. Mm-hmm. I thought it was a nice change of pace of like, we're no longer cleaning out bodies or camping with creepy guys or just trying to figure out how life works, because that to me felt very relatable to like everything currently going on. Like, a government's trying to operate in really difficult times and you're trying to please everybody, but your leadership circle isn't sure how to do it. So they try to come together as a democracy. The one thing that I thought was weird, though, is when they're trying to bring back democracy to Boulder, and Harold is like, well, I think you guys should be leaders indefinitely. And it's like, that's not a democracy. That kind of is in the same way the government that Randall Flagg wants to set up in Vegas. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
But I understand, because these 5, the 5 and the witch, these 5 got their calling from Abigail. That's why I think everybody was okay with it. But maybe Boulder in the future might go to a more democratic system of power.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I don't know if he said permanently, but definitely the idea that no one else was at it. And Damon in the chat, thanks chat for joining us, and also y'all on the replay, is saying, isn't there someone still missing? I'm thinking Damon's referring to the leadership, because I think there's maybe 1 or 2 other characters who are supposed to be on the leadership committee. I think one of them is Susan, who we'll talk about in the comparison of the book. Susan is a character that's in the book, and my guess is that we actually saw her get shot today. So who was with Dana, because in the book she's actually one of the people rescued with Dana, but it seems like it was only Dana that was rescued from them. So I think Susan is one of those characters who might have been sacrificed, because originally with this whole thing with the spy thing, and we'll talk about that, who nominates who, Susan is one of those people in leadership, and there's been no kind of thought process or reference to Susan at all. So that may actually be a thing. In the chat, Cage is saying, I actually felt bad for Harold, but knowing what he does, my sympathy runs dry. Yeah, he's planning on bombing people. I mean, you gotta, at a certain point, everyone has a choice. So that's definitely a thing. Although, like I said, this episode did good for me in terms, I guess that's good storytelling, that the episode really kind of made me think, is he completely bad? Maybe he has some redeeming quality, especially in his friendship with Teddy.
My boy Teddy.
We're going to talk about Teddy and how I'm not feeling Nadine even more.
Nope.
Given how that happened. But so we got more of the inners of the political happenings. And I think a pointed thing is that they chose not to tell the town about Randall Flagg and the fact that the stranger was supposedly, and they kind of convinced themselves that, well, maybe we don't know what we saw. Okay, but y'all all agreed that there were dreams you all were having, but now you don't know that you can't be sure that you saw this guy's eyes turn black. And
right.
To me, I think that shows a little bit of the issues with their leadership. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I just feel like I'm still not completely convinced they're all the best leaders for this town, to be honest.
And I think it goes back to what Mother Abigail said. It's like when Nick was like, I don't believe in God. And they were like, well, Nick or God believes in you. And I think they're going about that. Like all of them are unsure. They all had different lives several months ago, just not too long ago. And then Captain Trips decimated everybody. And they're trying to pick everything back up. So I can kind of see, like, if I was in that situation, be like, really?
Just kind of like, I don't want to cause any problems, so let's not tell them that happened, because then there's pandemonium. We just want things to run smoothly. We're trying to rebuild civilization. So I can see a little bit how,
And the last government killed everybody, and they don't want to start a government that would do the same thing again.
Yeah, I think to a certain degree. I think they're just trying to go along to get along now. And Jen in the chat, hey Jen, is saying, all I see is Amber Heard. I'm like, Nadine who? Yes. We'll talk about Nadine a bit more. And I know there was a lot of issues with who Nadine was cast, who was cast as Nadine of Amber Heard, and not everyone was, there's some controversy around the actress, but I one thing for sure, she can definitely play a villain. So, that's not necessarily, she definitely can do that. So what we saw was that they sent spies. Yeah. So we're at a point where they're starting to send spies to Vegas, and clearly they're not telling anyone that they're sending spies to Vegas. They're just like, they're kind of doing things under wraps. And I don't know if Mama Abigail is even aware that they're sending spies to Vegas, because she seemed to have been telling Nick this episode that we can't really do anything right now. We need to just wait for a sign. So Mama Abigail seems to be in the thought process of, we just need to wait for a sign. Let's just keep doing Boulder, while the team is kind of like, let's send some spies over there, So they seem to be a little bit on a difference of what's going on. And so the three spies that are chosen are Judge Ferris, Dana, and then Tom Cullen, our boy Tom Cullen. So those are the three that were chosen. Dana was chosen, as a woman going in there and things like that. So what did you think about the three they chose to be spies and the whole process of their reasoning for who they chose?
I agree with it. I enjoyed it a lot. I thought it was very intricate how the whole interview process went. I thought that was, as far as, capturing an interview on camera, technically speaking, it is definitely interesting. Some TV interviews can fall flat in a movie when they're trying to go from point A to point B, but this was all just fantastic. I do think Tom is a very good choice to go in to Vegas, because if I'm guessing correctly, Randall Flagg's people are the most liberal-minded people who would think that Tom, unfortunately, because of who Tom is, like Franny was worried about, Tom was just going to fly under the radar. He's going to be okay, and they won't detect him.
No one would assume, Yeah,
no one would assume that Tom, he's just a friendly guy riding his bike from Oklahoma, go see her. And, Dana may have a little bit of a harder time in Randall Flagg's Vegas, for other reasons as well, maybe gender related or race related. If he is the dark man and evil guy, he's not going to be open and accepting of everyone. Yeah. Unless he tries to deceive them. If he shows up personally and he's got the rock. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think, and then we had Judge Ferris.
Yeah.
The older woman.
Judge Ferris, I think, can blend in the easiest.
Yeah, being an older woman.
Yeah, they said she had 50 good years behind her. She's from the old world. If she shows up, she'll just look like a middle-aged lady in Vegas, just wanting to live a better life or get back to her own life, because there's civilization there. So I think the three's good.
I will say that Larry, I didn't like actually how he kind of said about Judge Ferris. It wasn't that he had 50 good years behind her. His saying was exactly, she's not exactly someone who has 50 good years ahead of her. AKA, she's close to dying anyway. So have foot in the grave so she can go over there and risk her life. So it was like, okay, that's why I was kind of like, I don't know. I don't like how these 5 people are being chosen to kind of decide other people's fate. And I think I think that's going to play a little bit more in the later parts of the series of what they're actually supposed to be doing at Boulder. Not necessarily that they're supposed to be the ones, I think given what the book actually is, I think we're going to see a little play on what we saw here and maybe some of the problems with it. And Damon actually talks about that, and we'll talk about that in the book comparison. Damon says in the chat, thought they should have hypnotized still makes it cooler for me. And Damon, I believe, is referring to Tom Cullen, because in the book and in the 90s series, they actually hypnotized Tom. So for him to go on, we'll get in a little bit more about why they did that in that story. And they didn't do that in this story. They just were kind of like, well, let's send him in. He should be able to get back on its own, which I think to me kind of took away from his story a little bit because of what happens when he's hypnotized in the book and what's revealed about him. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So that was definitely a change of how they sent him in. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And I loved his interaction with Nick, like Tom and Nick from the older remake to now are my 2 favorite characters, I believe.
Yeah.
And they almost pulled on my heartstrings at the end of this episode, just because the chemistry between Nick Andros and Tom Cullen is perfect.
Yeah, they're definitely friendship goals in this one too. Yeah. And before we jump into that, because there's a really cool flashback with Tom and Nick that we can talk about next. Jen in the chat is saying the decision making came off as callous. Exactly. That's what I just felt like the reasoning behind why they would. Like Stu was the only one who was kind of like, I'll go. Stu was the first to be like, hey. Yeah. I want to go. Stu wasn't about sending other. He's like, I just don't feel right sending other people to go kill, like potentially die. And I'm sitting here back in the weeds. And I felt like, thank you, Stu.
Yeah.
Because all these other people seem, even though they're reluctant to be leaders, they also seem like I don't actually want to sacrifice myself either. And I just don't think that's necessarily the best makings of a leader. The leader has to be the first in line, if you ask me. And I felt like they were being a bit kind of, like Jen was saying, callous in their reasoning.
Yeah, like if anyone was going to be president of Boulder, it's going to be Stu. And also, I thought about this when you were talking about the decision making. Mother Abigail is not like, she's not God incarnate, but she was chosen by God as a voice. And I thought the way that they were interviewing people for spies went against it, because if I remember correctly in the Bible, it says, thou shalt not judge. Yeah, you be judged. So they were like kind of doing the antithesis of what Mother Abigail was thinking about.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the conflict works.
Yeah. And I think it's subtle, but I really feel like there's I feel like there has to be a reasoning why this episode made us watch how the decision making was being made in the group. Because I'm glad I'm not the only one who felt like it felt a little off about how they were deciding about other people's lives. So speaking of Nick and Tom, we had a cool flashback and an introduction of another character, Julie, in this one. So we see a little bit more of Nick and Tom's friendship and how they connect. And we also, within this was where you saw the Stephen King cameo.
Yeah.
Not a live version of him just yet. Maybe he may turn up in a live cameo, but we saw him in a picture in this one. And so we meet Julie, and she's just as mean as ever when it comes to Tom, calling him the R word and whatnot, and being very mean to Tom. And I just felt some type of way. And you know what was so interesting is that they made it so he heard it this time. We'll compare it in the 90s version and stuff too, but he wasn't necessarily around before. When she was talking so badly about him initially anyway. And so we saw that, and basically Nick chooses Tom. And so we see a little bit of the extent of their friendship. And I loved it. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that they kept the heart of the friendship with these two, because it's one of the best relationships, I think, in the story.
And that's, sorry to interrupt. I completely agree with you on that. And that was the one thing that threw me off guard, because I don't know about you guys, but most remakes I watch, the heart is gone. And then people wonder why it's not a good movie or a good reboot of a TV show. But this, I'm really happy, and most likely because King was behind it himself, that they kept the heart in both versions of the movie very much alive.
I mean, honestly, it's just such a pivotal relationship as well, in a variety of ways that we see right now, and I feel like we'll see in the future. So to play it down, I think it would be a disservice. So I'm glad they made the right decision in letting us know the real connection between Tom and Nick. And then we saw Stephen King in the Hemingway homes.
Yeah.
The Hemingford homes, where they found Mother Abigail. And this was interesting to me, that they found Mother Abigail in a old folks home, which as Damon is asking in the thing, and that's what I was also confused about. Because Damon is asking, so nursing homes have cornfields? And I'm like, no, they do not. And this is, I don't know if this is a big change from the original necessarily. I couldn't find it. People who are watching the replay and the chat, if you know exactly in the book where they find, if they even mention where Nick and Tom meet up with Mother Abigail, let us know, because I know in the 90s version, she was still on her old property. And then they went somewhere else. And then, or they were already in Boulder, something like that. She had a house.
Yeah, she had like
this one, she straight up in a nursing home. And I'm like, what? I thought she had property. So, you know what I mean? How is she up in a nursing home, Hemingford home? What was that? Why? I mean, because the cornfield makes sense in the ones we've seen before, because that's where she lived.
Yeah. I have a theory behind that.
Okay, what's your theory?
They modernized it, and I lived in a small town before where a nursing home was right next to a cornfield, because they didn't build a strip mall on it yet. But I have a theory that in this version, a friend or a remaining relative, because Abigail's like in her 100s. So she's
like 103 or something, 102 years old,
Still young enough to make her own bread, but they didn't say that in this one. I have a theory and a feeling that somebody moved her to a nursing home shortly before the events of Captain Trips, like a year to a couple of months, because she's in her 100s, like she's past 99. And that's not being ageist or anything, but maybe because everybody else was dying, people in her family wanted her to be careful, and they put her in a nursing home themselves, and then they just died.
Maybe. I mean, from my understanding in the book, and we can dig a little bit deeper into it, is that she had outlived all of her family at 102. Yeah. So, or at least all the older ones who would be capable of maybe putting her in a home. I was just kind of weirded. I was like, she had a home.
She was talking to her dead friends too.
Yeah. And I was just like, she was like, I don't know if the pills are going to work, and I don't got enough water. I'm like, wow, she's struggling. What is happening here? Was that what happened? Because I remember also, but we'll talk about that more a little bit in her book version. She was kind of waiting to die in some things because she was so old. So it was kind of like, yeah, it was a little weird. So that is a very poignant question of if nursing homes have cornfields, because I didn't get how that made sense, unless they just did it so that Stephen King could be in a picture of Hemingford home somehow. I'm not sure. Maybe that was the whole point of that. And then we get to Harold, Nadine, Seduction, and then Harold, Nadine killing Teddy. Oh my gosh. Ugh, Nadine, can't stand you. So in the very beginning, you know, Nadine is on him after the elections, after the town hall meeting, and he has a little accident. That makes sense for a guy like Harold, you know, with her just basically sitting on him. And so we see that they have created a agreement that they can do everything but have sex, because her virginity, Nadine's virginity, as she has, you know, claimed, I am Randall Flagg's queen, which she seems to really love to be able to say, is preserved for Randall Flagg, and that he can't do that, but he can do everything else. What did you think of that scene?
Oh man, that was that was fun. It was definitely more enticing than the '90s version, but you can show
Yeah.
more on TV now.
Yeah.
And definitely definitely broke Harold down even more, just as a person. I'm pretty sure Harold was a virgin at that point, most likely.
He
And
is.
he is?
She said that to him. She was like, "You're a virgin. I'm a virgin too. It's fine."
Okay, sure. Sure Nadine was. But yeah, Harold, that was that's one way to recruit somebody to build a bomb for you, that's for sure.
Well, we saw in the last episode that
Yeah.
was Flag's instructions to her, which was basically, you need to light his fuse. So,
and she did.
Yeah, so it was that happened. She lit
Small
his fuse, his small fuse.
It's like buying a what is it? The black cat firework from like a tent, and the fuse is only that big, and then okay, no analogies.
Is that firecracker talk? I don't know.
Yeah, it's firecracker talk. I bought a lot when I was a teenager.
Okay, so they hook up in some kind of way, or at least he gets off, and she's kind of like, okay, sure, whatever. And so when the lights are getting put back on in the city, they are also trying to go and get explosives that Harold figured out where to get from, and that's when sweet Teddy is, Harold's friend, the one who nicknamed him Hawk, his friend, his main BFF in this whole situation, the one guy that Harold seemed to be a little bit more relaxed around, went like kind of himself a bit more. And so Nadine straight up shoots him because, Teddy came across her getting stuff, and I guess she didn't want to try to explain it away. I don't know if that was done to make it so we know for sure that there is no redeeming Nadine necessarily, and Harold seemed really mad at that, rightfully so. And I think maybe that is perhaps a way of saying, his one last good connection in this world too was also taken away.
Yeah, I completely agree. Here you have Teddy, the average person in like a desolate country, just probably doing like I think I told you during the episode, I would probably just get free Blu-rays from, because nobody's alive to run that 7-Eleven. Like that was cool. Like, we would all kind of look and pick stuff up, like some of them did in the show too. And Teddy just seemed to be a guy who wanted to just get back to normal and take advantage of a few necessities and fun opportunities in the apocalypse. And unfortunately, he's friends with the wrong people.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like had Harold had a chance, he might have tried to not have to kill Teddy, but he pretty much made the choice for the both of them. And as Damon is saying in the chat, she's a lot stronger character in this version. I definitely think it made it so she's picked her side. I feel like, and we can talk about it a bit more with the 90s comparison, that she was a little bit more on the fence. And I feel like in this particular case, she is not on the fence at all. She is all go to be the queen of the new world, or wherever she thinks being the queen is for Flag is, and she's not letting anyone get in the way. And that definitely showed through this episode when she killed one of the most likable people. And Jen is saying in our chat, when Teddy said run, he knew. Yep. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think on some level, at first I thought, well, maybe he's telling him run because he thought that she might shoot him, but maybe he also knew you're in with the wrong crowd. You need to get out of this because, Teddy was his friend. And so that was another heartfelt moment. I felt like, with Teddy, and the other heartfelt moment with Tom and Nick when they were saying bye to Tom in the car, and this moment. So there were a lot more heartfelt moments this episode where you came to care a little bit more for certain characters. Like I came to care for Stu a bit more. I came to care for Nick more, Tom more, Teddy, R.I.P. Teddy. I came to understand Harold a bit more. And I came to dislike Nadine way more than I disliked her in the other version. Yeah. So good on the show, I think, because it was like now they're starting to make people feel things for these characters and for a character or root against the character, which I feel was lacking in the first and second episode.
It's definitely way more refreshing than like watching. It almost felt like a weird karaoke version of the original in the first like 2 or 3 episodes. And then it's like, okay, all right. They did what they did. Because I'm thinking from like a writing standpoint that, you know, every writer has to make the decision, the most important one, which is at what point does my story actually begin?
Yeah.
And it almost felt like the writer themselves were conflicted in the first 3 episodes.
Yeah, I think they were trying to figure out how do we get a lot of this stuff in and then get to the part where we really want to start telling the story, but we have to get all this other stuff done first. And it kind of felt that way, that they were kind of getting certain things out of the way so they could get to these moments where these significant things start to happen. So we basically got what I felt like was a leveled episode. We had some heartfelt moments. It was solid. And I think that was kind of the main stuff. And the question is, and y'all can let us know in the chat and in the replay, is The Rock still alive? As Teddy asked. He's like, do you think The Rock is still alive? And at that moment, I really, truly loved Teddy. And and it was, I think, something, you know, this is, you know, with all the political happenings going on with the group, I felt like he was a little bit of a lighter character that I enjoyed every time he was on screen. So let us know if you think The Rock is still alive, y'all. We need to know, is The Rock still out there in the post-apocalyptic world? Is Tom Cruise still out there? Harold Boy. That's another question. What happened to Tom Cruise? So, okay. With that said, let's get into the comparisons, because it was all throughout. Some of y'all in the chat and also in the replay may have some things where you saw this episode and you were like, okay, why did you choose this? So let's get right into it. So I think the first thing we have to dive into is the zoo. And I'm calling it the zoo because that was the moment with the Deliverance guy who beat up Harold and also was about to sexually assault Franny and was keeping those other 2 women probably as sex slaves, right? Dana and the other woman. And so in the book version, this guy is called Doc, and he is handling a zoo. It's him and a few other men, actually, and other women that they have held captive. And so they basically take these women captive and as sex slaves and things like that. And what happens in the book is that they are somewhat stalking Stu, Franny, Harold, and Glenn, who already had linked up in the book by then. And their plan was to kill the men and take Franny. And so what happens is, in the midst of all that, it doesn't work, of course. They kill Doc and the other guys, and they're able to save Dana and Susan, who is probably the person who earlier Damon was referring to as missing, because in the 90s version of this, Susan is actually there in Boulder because she was one of the people that also was saved by Stu and them. But it would seem that they switched that in this version by making it so that Dana was the only person who got to get rescued from the zoo.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting choice. I'm glad they put it in because that wasn't in the 90s version at all. Dana is in the 90s version and Susan is in the 90s version. But the whole reference of how Dana came to get to Boulder, her backstory, is not there whatsoever. And in this one, we got a little bit more. I may get a little bit more as she becomes a spy in Vegas, a little bit more of her backstory. So I thought that was interesting that they chose to include the zoo situation in this series.
Yeah, I once again, I don't think they could ever get away with doing what they did in this episode on the 90s television. Like, this isn't your mama's CBS. Like, and I had to realize that, like, this isn't HBO Max, it isn't Hulu. Like, this is actually CBS, and they're getting away with everything. Yeah. And like back in the day, it would probably be like a shot of a guy's hand opening up the truck in a horrified woman's face.
Yeah.
And then the guy's on the floor and the women have the pipe in their hands.
Yeah, it would have gotten,
Yeah, but I thought this was great. It definitely was a fantastic scene for female empowerment. overtaking this creepy dude who also could not stop using the word snowflake. I wonder where I've heard that term before.
I feel like that was definitely a play on perhaps a certain stereotype in modern day of who they consider snowflakes, and a little bit of a caricature of who that man may be.
There was definitely some realism sprinkled along the fiction in that scene. And I was wondering, like, was Harold genuinely going to do it, going to, like, get revenge, or would he be strong enough to do it? And I agree with Jen, who just sent a comment. When is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar going to show up? I know, right? Is he alive in this? Is The Rock still alive? But The Rock could take Randall Flagg any moment in time. I believe so.
Damon answered in the chat before we get to that one. Damon answered in the chat, The Rock is going to be the fourth Walker.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying he would become a zombie? Necessarily, is that he's a walker? Because that's my idea of that's what they're called in The Walking Dead, right? And then and Damon, in the question earlier when he was asking, isn't someone missing? He said, I'm not talking about Sue as in Susan, though. I'm talking about the guy who went west with the others. I think you might be referring to I think we talked about this actually last episode, when I think that happens later on. So we can't
talk too much
about that. It doesn't necessarily happen yet, but the character you may be referring to, I think I explained that he was actually changed to a woman. So that we can talk about that closer to if it actually happens. But I definitely think that character was changed to a woman.
Yeah, because we're still figuring out what Vegas is requesting yet, and they're not. They don't want to send their best people yet. They're sending spies. Yeah,
so we'll see. But I think that person you're talking about is a woman now in this particular version. So we got that with the whole zoo, and that was that. I thought that was interesting. And then we have the 90s version, because let's talk about Teddy. Because as I was watching, I don't know if they ever actually said his name in this miniseries. And that's the thing with a lot of these characters, actually. I don't know. I think that might be another shortcoming. They're not letting people say their names, or maybe that is something that I'm missing. So I'm not sure, but I looked up the cast list. His character name is Teddy, and I was like, is Teddy who they created for this mini series so Harold would have a friend, or was he someone who was already in it? Well, in the book, Teddy does actually exist. He dies a different way. I don't know if I can reveal the way he dies, because it's somewhat connected to future happening, but let's just say he doesn't die the way he did this episode. Nadine is not the one to kill him in the book. So that was a choice by the creators of this particular miniseries to make it so that he is killed by Nadine. And I'm kind of interested as to why they chose to do that. And so then you have the situation where also in the 90s version, Teddy isn't even in Boulder necessarily at all. Teddy is actually played by Stephen King in the 90s version, and he picks up someone who is hitchhiking, right?
I think he's driving a snowplow. Yeah,
he appears towards the end. I can't tell you how, because also that may be in connection to a spoiler, because Teddy, played by Stephen King in the 90s version, actually appears towards the end of the 90s version series. So he's not even in Boulder. So they kind of I think this series went right back to more of the novel version, and also, but they put him in there, but they also changed his death for some reason. Because in the 90s version, he doesn't even die. And in the book version, he dies completely different. So that is something that happened, which was, I think that's also an interesting choice.
Yeah, very much.
Another difference was, like we were talking about, Dana in the book has no real backstory in the 90s version. In the book, she actually has a very big backstory. And she, in the book, in the 90s version and in this version, she does end up becoming a spy. So that is the same kind of thing. And so, okay. So Damon in the chat is actually saying that Teddy was the one, Stephen King's Teddy in the 90s version was the one that brought Nadine to Boulder.
That's right. Wow, yeah, that's right. He was in it for like a smidge.
A second. It was a Stephen King cameo. So they totally kind of made his character, they just kind of put him in there. So that was what happened. And in question to Damon's answer to Damon's question, the character he was asking about who is missing, yes, she is already in Boulder. You've seen her. She's the one that comes out, who is the one that tells people when Mother Abigail wants to actually see people or not.
Yeah.
I think that's who you're talking about. So now let's get to Tom, because it was already mentioned how they sent Tom Cullen to Vegas is very different from what happens in the book and in the 90s version. In the 90s version and in the book, he's supposed to be hypnotized. Like they tell him these things in hypnosis, probably because, they're afraid he won't be able to like listen, remember it or something like that. And they tell him these things in hypnosis. And in hypnosis in the book, it's revealed that God's Tom, as they call it in the book, comes through. As in Tom, when he's in hypnosis, is very, he's way more cognizant. He's way more able to kind of speak like someone who can be considered not neurodivergent necessarily. And so that's considered God's Tom. That happens under hypnosis in the book. That totally didn't happen in this one. And they totally didn't do hypnosis at all. At least in the 90s version, they did hypnosis. He didn't become completely like he didn't totally change, but they did do hypnosis to kind of explain what they were putting in, just in case, Randall Flagg could read minds or something like that. That was a big thing about that. Like if he could read minds, he wouldn't be able to read Tom's mind because Tom wouldn't know it was inside of him or something. So,
yeah, that element is definitely not in it. It seems like the people only know about the other people if they've had the same dream.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I don't know why, because we were talking about last week how, Cage in the chat was also talking about it as well. We were talking about the potential for Tom's storyline, because there's a lot about him in the book that can be explored about his, about his backstory and stuff. And they kind of didn't do it so far. And I'm a little disappointed because I'm like, you have a chance to do that. You're putting everything else from the book in there.
Right.
So why are you not giving this a chance to be explored a bit more? So that's a little bit like, okay, so we're not going to get the hypnosis plot line. Weird. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what to say about that. Maybe they thought it was offensive if a mentally handicapped person was hypnotized. I'm not 100%, but then again, like Fran didn't seem like the best supportive character during that sequence either. But yeah, I mean, it kind of takes like more of a supernatural element out of Tom and actually who he is and how capable he is as a person, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of conflicted on that too.
Yeah. And I think also with this, I think the reason why episode 3 was such my fave so far, because it was more overtly supernatural. And I felt like they dialed it back again, the supernatural aspect. Yeah. Now we're back to like not as supernatural, which was like, okay, I thought we were, leaning more into that. And now we're kind of back to political maneuverings and harsh reality. Like, okay, fine. But yeah, those were the main differences that we noted with this version. And other people pointed out the Mother Abigail thing, and we want y'all in the chat and in the replay to let us know if she was in a nursing home in that book or not, because I don't think she was. So were you about to say something?
There was one change that I realized while you were talking about the other changes. I'm pretty sure in the 90s version, the 90s movie, that Harold and Nadine successfully hook up almost. Like he does pretty much everything but the one thing that he can't do because of Flagg. Because there's one part where they cut to him and he's like on the edge of a bed or a couch, like smoking a cigarette.
Yeah.
Like with his shirt off. So they kind of made him more of the realistic, confused, scared Harold.
Yeah.
That was more portrayed in the book than the melodrama of the 90s.
And we may see an evolution of that. I mean, that was just one encounter because Nadine said they can keep doing that until they leave Boulder. So now that his best friend is now dead, he may become even harsher towards her. So that may be the catalyst to treat her very badly sexually or something like that. So we may see that. And also while you were saying that, I actually realized there was one other difference in the book and this version, which was the Julie, Nick, and Tom flashback. In the book version, Julie and Nick actually have sex in a convenience store. They actually go all the way through with sex while Tom is outside waiting. And then, you know, as Julie keeps talking and Nick kind of realizes that Julie's very mean and just kind of annoying, he decides he wants to go back to Tom and give him his medicine, because the thing was, in the book version, Tom was having stomach troubles. And so Nick went to go to a convenience store in order to get Pepto-Bismol for him. And that was also in the 90s version as well. But in this version, they make it so that they don't have sex. They're just kind of making out. And then Tom comes along. And then there's a whole thing between them and that. So that was a little bit of a difference. So no nookie for Nick in this one either.
No nookie or mom and pop shops.
Yes.
So they were like in the back of a warehouse or a Lowe's or a Walmart,
which makes sense. Modern time, right? There's going to be more of that. Yeah.
And maybe he was trying to get Pepto-Bismol in bulk, but they just didn't bring it up.
Maybe. Tom just seemed like he was walking around. Like, he just seemed like they were getting clothes and stuff, and Nick was laying down in the bed. It didn't seem like Nick was searching for anything. So I just feel like they kind of just took out that plot line and they were just somewhere, you know.
Hanging out in the
Okay, so for our last segment of this episode, who did you identify with? Although I think I already know. Who did you identify with most this episode? And those of you in the chat and also in the replay, let us know which character you identified with most this episode.
I definitely identified the most with Harold's friend, who was Teddy. I loved him because I would have done that too. I think I'm redundant now because I brought it up at the beginning of the show. But when Teddy, now that Teddy bit the bullet, unfortunately, I'm going back to Glenn. And I have a question about this that maybe I'm thinking way too hard. Glenn is smoking a ton of weed the entire way through. And I picked that up because Stu was like, no, don't offer him that when they were doing the circle. Where are you getting all of this?
I don't know.
At one point, he's vaping from a pen with cannabis oil. And this is for a different podcast in general. But that stuff expires. And more than the actual plant does. So I'm like, really, is this college professor going to be vaping the entire time? But like, it's going to run out, my dude. But I'm going to probably go with Glenn.
Okay. You mean, okay, so you're going to go with Glenn, not Teddy. Glenn because he's smoking weed.
No, Glenn because he's still alive. But if Teddy...
What?
Teddy for this episode alone is my answer.
Okay. And let us know in the chat as well. Damon Robinson in the chat is saying Teddy. He identified with Teddy. I'm thinking it's because of the DVDs and stuff. I guess the person I identified with the most was Stu this episode, a bit more just because of the whole idea of, leadership and not wanting to be that person who is telling other people to do things that I myself would not do, and being kind of uncomfortable with, playing the machine game of, got to do this, say the right words. And, and I think we all can do it if you, need to, but it's also kind of like, well, maybe I don't want to lie to people. Maybe I don't want to put other people at risk. Maybe that doesn't make me feel like a good person, and kind of having to deal with that conscious of playing the game, of trying to get ahead, but also, having to deal with the reality of a situation. So I definitely was feeling, I was feeling Stu's pain. Although I'm thinking, I feel like Jen in the chat as well is saying Teddy. I feel like a lot of people are probably going to say they relate to Teddy, but I will say I relate to Teddy and wondering if The Rock would have still been alive.
Yeah, me too.
I was like, yes, you know what? That is something I might question in the world. Like, is all my faves, like, is Rihanna still alive? Is The Rock still alive? Like, we gotta check on our faves.
How's
Margot Robbie?
How's Kim and Kanye's marriage in this universe?
In the universe, yeah. Did they survive? What's going on? So, yeah. But I feel like all of us had a soft spot for Teddy this episode. R.I.P. Rest in heaven, Teddy, for this. Okay, so we did the, overall, we did the book comparison, and we did who we identify with most. So far, my feeling is that we're going to get a whole lot of Vegas next episode, I'm hoping. What are your predictions for next episode?
A whole bunch of Vegas, and I think there's potential to introduce a whole bunch of members of Flag's army, and not necessarily the traitors that we watched today.
Yeah, and I hope so too, because I just think the atmosphere elevates when Randall Flagg is on, because you get that sense of danger. You get the sense something's going on here. So I hope that we get more Vegas for sure. But yeah, let us know in the chat and in the comment section on the replay. Thank you for joining us in the chat and in the replay. Let us know what you're hoping to see in episode 5, which we'll also be covering next week, what you want to see, which character you loved, and how you're feeling about this series so far. I know this has been a polarizing series for plenty of people. Not everyone's feeling it. It's definitely I love it, hate it, or let's just push through and see where it goes kind of an emotion. So let us know, comment down below and also in the chat. And thank you again for joining us here live, and also for you guys who are watching. And Damon also jumped in at the last minute to say Trash Can Man is who he would like to see, which is a character also who is in the books. And we will hopefully be seeing him next episode so we can talk about him next episode. But thank you again. Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for joining us. Please make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. And also just have a great, fun rest of your week. Let's get creepy together. Thanks again.
Thank you.